back to Cinematic. I'm Ryan. And okay, this, I usually do such a poor job of introducing this series and every series that I do. I do a bunch of series and I'm poor at introducing them. This is the movie-focused one wherein season 1 is all about Kung Fu movies. I made a big long list. It's on Letterboxd. It's linked below. It has me going through mostly Hong Kong action, but also what the States tried to do with that in the 80s. And that we're kind of just barely beginning to touch on and won't this week. But that's what this show is. And since views have been going up, thank you. I should probably say a touch more about it. So if you enjoy it, please head on over to Patreon or do all the like and subscribe things I'm told. And who knows, you might just influence me to do a movie, because this week, that's what this is. A bit ago, I spoke with friend of the show, Mitch in the comments, and we watched 8 Diagram Pole Fighter. He introduced me to Paul Thomas on YouTube, who did a top 10 of Lau Kar-leung movies. In fact, it's called Lau Kar-leung Top 10, The Obsessive Goes to China, episode 40, wherein he put martial arts of Shaolin at the top of his list. So that's all I know about it, or that's all I knew about it going in. Of course, I've turned to Wikipedia and the like to kind of fill in some of the gaps I'm learning as I go. And while that video did do a great job of telling me this maybe wasn't a typical Lau Kar-leung movie, which we have done a few of on this particular series, I don't think I was prepared for 2 things, actually. It's a Shaw Brothers movie that is directed by Lau Kar-leung, that is shot mostly, if not entirely, outdoors. I feel like there's one bit where I thought, okay, now we might be on a set, and I can't remember. I don't even think it made it to my notes. But for the most part, it's Lau Kar-leung does vistas, and like, I don't think we're approaching maybe King Hu levels here, but boy, maybe the countryside makes it easy. Either way, Lau Kar-leung, adept at showcasing some of the beautiful countryside available to him. But also, so we did Shaolin Temple not too long ago from 1982, yes. And it was a mainland production. We've mostly done Hong Kong action, and it was Jet Li's first movie. So there were a lot of reasons to put it on my list, and I did enjoy it, but was unprepared for how similar this movie is to that. It's essentially the third in that franchise. There's another one in the middle that I'm not going to do from 1984 called Kids from Shaolin that basically rounds out that trilogy, I guess. And this is that. So part of the reason it looks so familiar is because they shot in a lot of the same places in the Shaolin Monastery. In fact, Lau Kar-leung, I wonder if he's one of those directors. A lot of directors, because they are such a, I don't know between all of them what their reasoning might be, but a lot of directors don't like to reference other works because it can either influence theirs or, any number of reasons. In this, I don't know if Lau Kar-leung is that type of director, but he uses some of the same shots I saw in Shaolin Temple. Not like a ton, and there's certainly of parts of the temple that I would understand. There would be some parallel thought going on there between directors, because they are, one of them was the concave that's been dug out of one of the monastery floors because of, millennia or however long it's been of monks practicing Kung Fu. So why wouldn't you want to show that? But this is not a mainland production. Shaw flew their crew over and essentially were entirely responsible for the shoot, although didn't use the same stable of actors that I'm used to seeing in a Lau Kar-leung movie. In fact, there are so many returning faces from Shaolin Temple. Jet Li, of course, plays the lead, Zhu Ming. Even though I might be getting ahead of myself here, he plays a unique character. I feel like, especially in Lau Kar-leung movies, a lot of what we've seen are kind of very gifted students that the movie is somewhat built around, or at least their journey. While Zhu Ming is talented, and any character that Jet Li plays probably is going to be, it doesn't feel like the focus of the film in this way. Actually, it's kind of unique. But also Yu Hai is back as his Sifu yet again. He plays a Master Shi Ren. And Hu Jianqiang is back. He played Wukong in Shaolin. He's here as Xiao Wei. So it just looks very familiar at the outset, especially where it begins. But luckily that doesn't last too long, except for one other thing. Jet Li's character is obsessed with revenge on a particular magistrate, governor, I think it was a general in Shaolin Temple, and it just has a fury about him because of it. And the monks are kind of looking at him from afar, being like, why is he so nuts? And eventually that magistrate sets up a birthday party wherein Jet Li sees his chance for revenge, along with Huang Chuyen's character, Sima Yan, whose parents were also killed by this particular magistrate. And so she takes off, I believe. So this movie is also called North and South Shaolin in some parts or markets or whatever it was. And it's because, oh boy, Jet Li comes from the north and Sima Yan comes from the south. And she is also joined by, I believe she's related to the Sifu at the Southern Temple. And when she takes off to take her revenge, he sends kind of a protector after her, and that's Xiao Wei, played by Zhang Qiang. So they all end up at this birthday party, try to enact their revenge, and it goes wrong, so they have to escape. And kind of the rest-ish of the movie is them on the lam, certainly the second act. So the similarities kind of dissipate at that point from Shaolin Temple. And not only because, I'm glad it's different, but also because I think it's better. And not just for the difference, it's something that Lau Kar-Long would obviously bring to a movie. He brings in that birthday scene where they are trying to enact their revenge. There's like over 100 extras, hundreds probably of extras in that scene, it seems like. And it's just a masterpiece of chaos. In fact, I just recently with, Millionaires Express, talked about how Sammo appears to have such a handle on all these moving pieces in his scenes and fights and all this stuff. Lau Kar-Long's been right there the whole time. And he's proven it with this one. And it doesn't end there. Basically, by the end, usually I watch these and I'm like, if you got to go check out a fight, check out this one fight from this one spot. I would have a hard time doing that for this movie. Every single fight, it's hard to pick between all of them in this thing. There's that first fight at the beginning that's, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Lau Kar-Long's really good at, we've all seen, I feel like, an action movie where the bad guys are just taking turns, and I'm not going to say Lau Kar-Long's necessarily immune to that, although it's much more gratifying to watch regardless. But in this thing, especially, and probably before, you just don't notice it. Like, there's one scene in maybe this movie that I think, like, there's some stuff going on in the background that, like, maybe those guys could have taken a break and attacked the guy that's really mopping up, 7 dudes at once, but you don't notice it, or it's just not practical the way he's choreographed the rest of the thing. So that, but then also probably halfway through the movie, there's the moment where Jet Li and Jian Chang's character meet kind of for the first time, North meets South. And they go at each other, but they do it in a way that once the other is kind of stymied, he kind of gives like a look at it. Like during that fight, you feel like they find mutual respect for each other. So it kind of tells a little bit of a story and character development that is rare in a lot of action movies, certainly when the action begins. And then there's the final fight. Yeah, basically when they, spoiler, come back at the magistrate, and it is just a wonder of close quarters combat. Some of it takes place on a boat, but also there's some parallel editing going on because Jian Chang's character is outside kind of mopping up while Jet Li is inside doing the close quarters thing with the governor himself. And there's a weapons heavy bit that is just fantastic all on its own. But again, the way that Jet Li and Lau Kar-Long pretty much work the room, you're never like, well, why don't they all attack at once? It just doesn't seem like an option, which I think is still a lesson that could be learned. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself. If you go back even further, this is actually also a love story, which I wasn't really expecting. He has this foot bangle, jewelry that I don't think is explained super well, but I also don't care so much, because I think the way this movie is paced, or the way things unfold, or at the speed at which they unfold, is actually pretty darn good. So by time they're telling me what that is, and so Sima Yan also has one, and they were separated at birth. And once she finds out who wears the other bangle, they come together, and if it's a girl, they will be sisters, and if it's a boy, they will get married. So when he sees that she has the other bangle, it kind of becomes a love triangle of sorts movie, because Chow Wei is interested in her at the same time. And I feel like I don't ever want to start with the negative, and I don't generally have a lot of negative things to say about these movies. But if you do that, then you're ending with the negative, and it's not. So if I have to say anything negative about this thing, it does come to the foreground maybe most. There's like a straight up kind of musical number in the middle where he's trying to reconcile his emotions. Even though he's a monk, he's found this girl that he is possibly betrothed to or in love with kind of quickly, it seems. But the music in this thing, like, I gave it a bit too. I'm like, do I not like the music here? Which I feel like I just haven't felt before in any of the movies I've done so far. But also I feel like it hasn't been so in your face, I guess, a bit. It's very synth heavy, so that might have something to do with it. I mean, we're in 86 at this point, so it's bound to be. But it also isn't additive. Like, even if I feel like I haven't commented on the music, like I've not had an issue with it because it's there to enhance or comment on or, otherwise improve my viewing experience. It's additive, like I'm saying. Here, it feels like it's taking away sometimes. So it's probably a nitpick, especially for a Lau Kar-leung movie, but I think by the end I was like, yeah, I don't like the music mostly. So what I do love, though, I think what ends up being the central theme of this thing is that he pretty much, I think when he finds out that she has the other bangle, the monks find him and take him back to the temple. And he's kind of forced to, I believe, stare at a wall for 3 years, which he's not the only one. He gets into the cave, and there's a guy that's been forced to do it for 9 years, I think. But he kind of goes through this crisis where he's trying to figure out, and it was seeded very early on. There was a line that I wrote down immediately when they said it, because I'm like, oh, this doesn't have to do with something. It's a pretty good line regardless. It's, I think because he's also kind of a rebellious monk, like he was in Shaolin Temple. He brings in some cooked meat, which obviously you're not supposed to do as a Buddhist, certainly in a monastery, and other things like that. But in so doing says, lives would perish when not rescued if in danger. Lives also perish when saving lives by the living. So might be some translation issues there, but it makes you think about it, which I was thankful for, because it's reiterated once he gets to the temple and is talking with that other monk when he says, without sacrifice, how can we save people? So kind of in 1 or 2 lines, they end up doing what Shaolin Temple did not do for me. You'll remember I had kind of a strange qualm about that movie, in that it seemed like the Buddhism was tossed off in a way that I didn't necessarily appreciate, or wasn't justified or reconciled in the film, really. It just seemed like they were like, yeah, Buddhism is important, but who cares? That's kind of what it seemed like to me. I'm sure there's a lot lost in translation there. Again, me, not a Buddhist, not culturally informed for the most part. So if you've got some gaps to fill in there for me, I'm all for it. But this movie, I think, did for me what that one did not, in just those few lines. And again, probably to Jet Li's credit as an actor, to the writing, which Lau Kar-leung didn't write this one, but I think still ends up being able to communicate this bit where Shaolin and the practice of Shaolin or Shaolin Kung Fu can be at odds with the tenets of Buddhism in a way. So as Jet Li's character is trying to find balance, I kind of figured out that maybe that's what the movie was trying to promote, and I think what kind of cinches it is when he ends up, it's not clear in the moment, which is probably good because it unfolds again in the third act in a pretty satisfying way. he takes off from the temple. In fact, he's like, can I get out of this thing? And the guy that's supposed to be there for 9 years is like, yeah, just do the roof. How else am I going to do this for 9 years? Which, again, made sense to me this time for whatever reason, for all the things surrounding it. And so he goes, and for a minute, it just looks like he's like, oh, okay, I get it. And then he goes and does what we kind of expected him to do in the first place. So I'm like, how does that actually balance out? Because he ends up giving the bangle to Chao Wei, and Chao Wei ends up betrothed to Sima Yan. So by the end, I'm like, oh, that was kind of the balance there. He did have to sacrifice, but he also did return to the temple. And the magistrate does, I don't want to spoil it at all, because you don't see it coming. I really did not see it coming. The way he is taken care of, but in that he gets to do that and then still makes the sacrifice in a way that, those two are going to be happy was perfect. I was like, oh, I get it now. This makes ton more sense to me than Shaolin Temple did. And for my money is just better constructed. Again, I don't know necessarily why I'm comparing it to that movie. It does remind me of it an awful lot. There are some similarities. It's the third and possibly the same franchise, but it's one of those cases where if you had to watch one, watch this one for sure. It's a good, The Martial Arts of Shaolin from 1986. Go check it out. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Paul Thomas. And keep the recommendations coming. I feel like I'm trying to pare down the list, but we all know how unsuccessful I am, generally speaking, at doing that. So, for instance, if you come back next time, there's no avoiding it at this point because I am moving chronologically, which is very cool if you think about it. This is, later in Lau Kar-Leung's career and after all of the Sammo movies we've already seen. So me having been biased in the direction of Sammo and Jackie, because that's just where I came into these things. That's how I came up. You're always going to have kind of a little bit of a bias in that direction. And being able to say that, Lau Kar-Leung is more than holding his own, and certainly, we'll have more to say, I think as we go. It's also not going to be the last Lau Kar-Leung movie I watch, so, for this series. So, next week, it's going to be no retreat, no surrender, and there is no going back at this point. So, come back for that. Thank you for being here for this. As always, you can find me on patreon.com/Ryan_runs_. There's also a PayPal button, not PayPal button not too far away where you can help me do more of this. I hope to every Tuesday continue to do Tetris Tuesdays at 10. And I think next on my list might also be to finally close out the Chasers Season 1 that I think kind of started this channel with. So lots of things on the menu, and if you want to go real deep on that stuff, just join the Patreon, and there are some posts on there, some of which might be public, so go check those out. And it'll give you kind of a roadmap of where I'm thinking of going with this channel, hoping to go, and could go with your help. So help me put your name up here.